It's air conditioned. But you know, we've been blessed with a whole lot of things going on between Memorial Day and the 4th of July. We are packed with events at the Evansville Wartime Museum. First of all, we had if I just mention three things that we've had recently, Congressman Larry Bouchon came and presented a congressional record about Alan Sanderson. Alan's over there by the column in the red shirt. I know you guys, he's the most valuable thing the museum has. And then we had just a week and a half ago, we had the B-17 came in, and you guys supported that B-17. Houston, they were sending us emails that they couldn't believe the response from Houston, Texas, that they were getting about the best treatment that they ever had was when they came to Evansville. Yeah. And the way they finished that was they said, "We will be back." So that's pretty neat. And then just last week we had a concert with the Evansville Symphonic Band. There was a patriotic concert dedicated to the Evansville Wartime Museum, and that was awesome. We highlighted the 5 branches of service with the color guard and everything. So that was a lot of fun. Now in the future, we've got we only have 2 major events that are fundraising. This is one of them. We only have 2 a year. The other one is a hangar bash, which is out at the hangar, and it's on October 12th, and it's open to the public. What we normally do is we have it catered, and the Home Brewers Association bring their craft beers out. We have a Dixieland band, and it's a real fun evening. 200 to 300 people come to that, so that's a good time. We've also got a speaker husband and wife team that are going to be talking about their escapades during the Persian Gulf War. One of the things that I'd like to highlight in the air show today, which I was at the pilot briefing this morning. They hosted it. We hosted a pilot briefing for them at the museum. But one of the planes in the air show is a CB, and it's a Republic Aviation RC-3 plane, and it can land on the water. It's in the air show today, and they should probably do some touch and goes landing on the water and take it back off. And that is a local plane, by the way, but it was made in 1946. So we're blessed to have you guys here today. Thanks for supporting the museum. It means all the world to us. I love seeing all the veterans in the audience. You know, my friends from Point Man are here. You know, there's friends from Honor Flight that are here. The community just embraces our patriotism in general. So thank you so much for coming, and watch for us next year.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I don't know if we mentioned there's a silent auction to the left that you can try to win something at the silent auction. Also, we have a representative from Honor Flight, Sue Bankert here. If anybody has not been on Honor Flight, she'd be glad to sign you up for a future Honor Flight, but you have to be eligible. Just not everybody can go. We got 2 speakers. I'm just going to talk about the first speaker first, and in general, what we're going to.
I meant to mention, I forgot that CB is one of the items that we're auctioning off. So
Okay.
the 2, you can actually fly on that. It's one of our auction items. He's going to offer 2 of those flights to the highest bidder. So that's a plane that you'll be able to fly on with 1 adult, 2 adults, or 1 adult, 2 children. And it's about a half-an-hour flight, and should be a good time.
He talked about that water plane. That's on the auction as well. So you're more than welcome to that. They'll land on the water if it's calm waters. Okay, first of all, we're going to talk about, I look at the age in this room, and it's all going to be appropriate for all of us here in the room. We're going to talk about an era from post-World War II. We've concentrated mostly on World War II here, but post-World War II all the way until 9/11, those 2 things, all that era changed a lot of things in everybody's life in the room. The atom bomb hit, I think, August 6th and August 8th, and Oppenheimer created the atom bomb that changed our lives. And there was a lady named Melba Phillips, she's from Winslow, Indiana. She didn't get credit. She was a woman, and she helped invent the atom bomb. Oppenheimer became a dove after that and realized that nuclear warfare was not good. So all of a sudden, the Cold War happened. The Cold War happened, and we created a hydrogen bomb. Mankind at least understood that we could destroy every one of us and everything on this planet Earth. And so our first talker is going to talk about the 1950s to the 1980s, because we had to go, during that time, a Cold War where we had to neutralize the Russians all the way to 1989 or 90. And our second talker is going to talk a little bit about the eyeglass, where we could see everything. We flew for 29 straight years, 24 hours around the clock. And we had to support planes doing that. He's going to talk about that. But first, we're going to hear about the eras from the 50s to the 80s of how we had a Cold War. And then we had a hot war, meaning Vietnam, and then not back to the Cold War. But in the hot war, how we had to de-escalate. We could not use everything we had. We had to back off. And that was not an easy job to back off. But I've heard General Threet talk several times, and he is an excellent speaker, and I think all of us will identify with what he's talking about. So we're lucky to have a man who graduated Ball State High School in 1951, General Gene Threet. Thank you, General. Have you talk.
I got so many directions here, I'm not sure I can handle it. Can't chew gum and walk at the same time. I have to tell a story because of the day and the weather that's separate in what Dr. Barning mentioned I was going to speak about. I was demonstrating an F-15, 1976, up at the Toronto National Air Show. We had a cover much like this, only it was foggy all the way down to the water. And you did your demonstration out over the lake. They had about 300,000 people there. I was talking to the air boss, the guy that clears you in. He said, "Oh, it's good here." I said, "Well, I'm IFR. I was in instrument flight conditions coming down the lake from Trenton." He said, "Oh, it's good." I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." My first maneuver was a 6G pull-up going straight up. And I did that, and I went in the clouds, immediately lost control of the airplane, got the nose back down, came out of the clouds and pulled on the stick hard. I was reaching for the ejection seat. It had not been an F-15, I'd have been in the water. So I was really going to make a demonstration. Now what am I going to do? Well, I decided to make up a low show. And we kid ourselves about a low show and a high show. And I just beat the heck out of everybody on the shore. They're all lined up with the gear down, gear up, upside down, and that sort of thing. And I made it up as I went. And they thought it was wonderful. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force was there, and later I saw him that evening. He said, "That's a wonderful low show." I said, "Yeah, it's the best low show I've had." So Diane's heard this many times, and that was the day I almost killed myself. The air shows here, I think, start about 2 o'clock, and certainly and I'm sure General Pilar doesn't want to impinge on that. And to start off with, thank you for coming today. I wonder why people would come and listen to a dumb fighter pilot, but I know now there's some Marines in the group. A wonderful gentleman called Mike Burkdahl sitting back there, and he knew I was going to say something about that. This is my first airplane. I flew that again, the Mexican-American War. The only problem with it is that I couldn't reach the rudder pedal. It's tough to handle in a crosswind. Let's see if this is working today. There we go. This is a brief outline of what I'd like to talk about if we have to have time, and we may not have time. The background on myself isn't important, except those who are in bold type are there to tell you something about pilot training in the Air Force. I started out in Hawthorne Flying School. It was all civilian flying schools in those days. That's not the case now, but the point of this is that the estimate that it costs a fighter pilot to arrive at an operational squadron in those days about $4 to $5 million. The current price is $9 million to get a trained fighter pilot into an operational unit, and it takes about 2 years. My wife and I had 4 moves during that particular time. And that simply displays the kind of training that you get in the Air Force. And that was through 3 different airplanes, 3 different training airplanes. Let's talk about the Cold War. I think I've got a pointer here. The importance of this pointer that isn't working. Anybody see it? This is what amounted to the wall in Europe that Winston Churchill so famously talked about, from Stettin in the Baltic down to the... You've got to use my mic or I'll get thrown out again. The point is that during the Cold War, we actually had Russia ringed, both here and even back in the United States, in the United Kingdom, with airplanes, both large airplanes and small airplanes. I flew out of Hahn and Incirlik, not as a permanent party, but deployed to those 2 instances. In Incirlik, we deployed as a nuclear force, and I have some aside stories about that. At Hahn, we were air defense. In other words, we were there to stop the Russians' airplanes should they come across. But this is a situation we found ourselves in what was called mutual assured destruction. That means if you start the war on either side, the other fellow has enough to destroy you. And you think about that, that was serious at the time. We didn't think about a great deal about it until I'll tell you the story of what happened when one of our folks was shot down, and I thought we were really going to do it. But in any instance, we deployed to these 2 locations from my home base, which was in Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, way out in the middle of nowhere. And we had nuclear alert is what we were trained for, and one of the problems during this time is we trained for almost nothing else, and this created problems later on. At the time when Vietnam came along, we almost forgot what it was all about, to drop conventional bombs and shoot the guns and so on. The airplanes weren't even capable most of the time, for the guns rusted because we didn't use them. We sat nuclear alert. 24-hour tasking when we were, in fact, in Incirlik, Turkey. And we're in the States, however. Many of these were one-way missions, I should say. And that's, fuel is always a problem in a fighter. You never have enough fuel unless you're on fire. And my particular target, and by the way, we memorized the targets. Again, Incirlik, my target was right in this area right here. That was about 700 nautical miles. I had enough fuel to get to about right there, coming back out. And that was the case on most missions, particularly the fighter missions. The fighters coming out of Germany, the United Kingdom, coming across here would run out of fuel coming about right there. The large bombers were stationed both in the United Kingdom and all along northern Africa. So we had the Russians pretty well hemmed in, and they knew that. And that was the ultimate breakdown of the Russians, who you would call with Reagan in office, and they could not keep up with us from an economic standpoint in maintaining the forces that we had. But they were covered for it. You can see we had tasking on the left-hand side. We were tasking the United States. Normally a wing has 3 squadrons of 24 airplanes. One of those squadrons at Clovis was always deployed, and the other 2 squadrons were getting ready to deploy. We had a 24-hour notice to get the squadron airplanes ready together and move. Really, that wouldn't work in a nuclear war. It'd only be the airplanes that are in place to be useful. But in any instance, in 24 hours, we can in fact move 72 airplanes from a wing to Europe and get them bedded down. Every squadron had a bed down base. Every squadron already had their targets determined. Every squadron knew and memorized the routes to their target. And the only thing we didn't bring from Clovis is we didn't bring the bombs. The bombs were already there. But we trained almost entirely when we weren't on deployment in Clovis on using a lab's maneuver to deliver. That's a low altitude bombing system. And I think I've got a picture of it here to demonstrate. I hope I do. Pardon? Okay, thank you. This is a low altitude bombing system. We were flying F-100s. You pushed too many, Dr. Browning. Go back one, please. Let's just try this. Our machine's too slow.
They don't build them like they used to.
That's a U-2, by the way, an interesting airplane, and I'll tell you an incident that occurred in Turkey that got our attention right away. That's an F-100, which is what we were flying in those days. We've come into a target, and this was all visual. We didn't have any radar. Go back one. Come into a target at 50 to 100 feet, high enough to see the target. That's what's important, and low enough to try to stay underneath the radar. Of course, coming across the Crimea area, as you can see, the radar would pick you up coming out eventually Turkey right away. So most of that was flown low level, trying to stay under radar, which costs fuel.
They're going back.
You got a problem walking and talking at the same time. Back starting again. Flying, I mean. Let's see, it's not responding. The point being is you come in at a 500 to, or 50 to 100 feet trying to stay underneath the radar, but tall, high enough so as you can see your target. And at 550 knots. You fly through with a small instrument that's simply a lateral indicator using rudders, a 4G pull over the target. And you hear a strange noise in a cockpit. A 4G pull over the target, and the bomb is set for an angle release that you've previously set in, and that was to determine how high the bomb is going to go. You roll out on top at about 10,000 feet and roll level then and do an Immelmann turn, named after German in World War I, by the way. And then you got 54 seconds that you need to get away from that bomb. The bomb goes on up to somewhere around 26,000 feet. And if you flew over the right target, generally speaking, that's where the bomb's going to hit. Most bombs were set for an airburst, however. There were two types of targets in the nuclear war. One was counterforce. Counterforce means the military installations of the enemy. The other was counter value, a strange word meaning cities. And of course, over a city, you would want the bomb to burst, the higher burst, to get a better effect. The F-100 carried a bomb that was called the Mark 7. It was about twice as powerful as anything dropped on Japan in World War II, and carried by a single-engine fighter. We're really taking it apart, which is fine. We did have an incident while deployed to Turkey, and I'll relay it to you because, as I said, it got our attention. A fellow named Francis Gary Powers was flying that strange-looking black airplane I had a picture of there, called the U-2. That airplane was unique. There are only a few were built. They're still in operation, only that was a later model. They flew above 80,000 feet, and for years, constructed in early 1950, were overflying Russia and taking pictures. In fact, those were the pictures that we studied our targets from, taken by that airplane. The Russians tried to shoot them down for several years and finally made it in 1959, I think it was. Francis Powers was shot down. He later was returned to the States in an exchange. But what happened in Incirlik and all over the world is there was a blackout in information, that is civilian information to us, and we normally kept 4 airplanes on Victor or nuclear alert. And those people were ready to go practically in the cockpit most of the time. But when he got shot down, we had 18 airplanes in Incirlik. We lined up every airplane we had and loaded up with nuclear bombs, and I thought we were going to go. And I thought, my goodness, I'm a lieutenant. I got a wife and 2 children at home. I didn't sign up for this. But in the final analysis, you think if it really was to go, it wouldn't have mattered. And that's the sad thing to think about. Thank goodness that we're out of that situation, but there's some similarities what's happening today in the future with the number of people that have nuclear weapons around the world. And some people, at least we were talking and dealing with Russians in those days, and we had some confidence that they thought, generally speaking, about their values much as we did. In other words, we didn't want to destroy each other, and it would have been complete destruction. There's an indication, thank you, Dr. Browning. There's the indication of that particular maneuver. But the important point was we never had enough fuel to get there, or get back. Next slide, please. This is the U-2. That was built and designed and built in about 6 months in the Skunk Works by a fellow named Kelly Williams. That airplane is still flying, and it's an amazing machine. It's actually a powered glider. The guy who was flying that day, Gary Powers, flew out of Incirlik, where we were stationed at the time. But we acted like they weren't there. They resigned from the Air Force and became members of the CIA. The CIA were the only people that were operating that airplane at the time. The Air Force is operating them now. They later flew over Cuba and were the first ones to indicate in the pictures that they took of the missiles that were being installed by the Russians in Cuba. Next slide, please. Cuba. I got out of the Air Force for 2 years because I was gone all the time. I left my wife and 2 children in Clovis, New Mexico. I came back and they said, "You're going to Germany unaccompanied." I said, no, I'm not going to Germany unaccompanied. And I was getting tired of sitting Victor alert. As I said, that's all we did. I sent all kind of bad letters and said my wife's going to divorce me and so on and so forth, which was not true. And the Air Force let me go. But 2 years later, I got the opportunity to be recalled, and I wanted to fly airplanes again. And I came back in, and 3 months later, I was sitting in a cockpit in a Korean vintage airplane that I flew in training initially in Florida, sitting alert for Cuba. At that time when Cuba, go ahead and click the other ones, about 4 or 5 of them will be fine. We didn't have a tactical proficiency. Once again, we were, as I said before, we were training all the time in those days on nuclear deliveries, and we flooded Florida with airplanes. You literally can't imagine how many airplanes were in the state of Florida. Those were on civilian fields. We could not even taxi without a plan to get the airplanes. In other words, the first one closest to the runway is the first one off. MacDill had a huge amount of concrete. We had 3 wings there, and plus the SAC bombers and all the tankers that were going to supply everybody coming out of the northern part of Florida. Had that occurred and we launched against Cuba, it would have been devastation. But this was not with nuclear weapons. This was with conventional weapons. That's enough. Next one, please. Growing tension, however, as you know, there was a meeting of two ships. I think it was an American destroyer that intercepted the next Russian tanker coming in with missiles on board. And that was the critical part, whether they were going to turn around or not, or we're going to destroy that tanker bringing these missiles in. It turns out, as you know, they turned around. We gave up the Bombark missiles out of Turkey, which didn't amount to anything. They were outdated at the time. And that particular instance was defused. Interestingly enough, after all that happened, we continued to sit alert for about 3-4 weeks after that particular critical incident, and somebody decided, and heaven knows where, somebody decided, well, we need a nuclear, in case this does happen, we need a nuclear option. So we all sit down and redrew our maps and so on, so we didn't run into each other, and we were issued an eye cover on one eye. And we were also told if we heard King Kong, you better get that cover over that eye, because you're probably going to have a nuclear burst right in front of you. And that was to at least have one good eye that you continue to fly. I've never heard anything so stupid in all my life. On to the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia, and this was, quote, my war, and the one that I had combat time in. This is an interesting picture. That's okay. The only reason I put this in here is this gentleman right here, named Levi Chase, and I'm so enamored with people like Mr. Sanderson, who are the real heroes that flew World War II in combat for years and years and years, and some of the best fighter airplanes in the world. He was called the truck killer of North Africa. His name is Levi Chase. He was a colonel. He was a wing commander at the time. And he retired as a 2-star general. And that's a 10,000th mission. And once again, I almost got mashed that particular day. I was flying number 2 on the 10,000th mission. And in those days, as Mr. Sanderson recalls, they came in low on and then pitched up as opposed to pitch out. We simply pitched out from 1,500 feet. We came in the harbor of Cam Bay, and I'm on the wing, very close, flying good formation, because that's the wing commander that's watching me. And we came in, and I'm looking at the water. We're damn near down in the water. We pitched up. Number 3 man didn't see me and came very close, probably within 5 or 6 feet of coming to the bottom of my airplane in the traffic pattern. That would have been the advice, or something that day would happen, and on our 10,000th mission to lose 2 airplanes in the pattern. Levi Chase was a good man. I think I'm on the left over there. This is my backseater right there. This is a picture of me in Thailand, and this is not about me. I didn't do anything that thousands of other people wasn't doing. And this was a triple nickel. Unfortunately, I wasn't there when they were able to do it, but over the war, the triple nickel killed 29 MiGs airplanes. That was the highest kill rate per squadron in the Air Force. And interestingly enough, at Christmas, they'd send a Christmas card to Hanoi, say, largest distributor of MiG parts in Southeast Asia. Merry Christmas. Now, you look at this 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a test on this man. I'm going to break it down. How are we doing on time, Dr. Browning? I'm going to break that in 2, but this shows the blue lines, for example, are simply lines of attack where you came out of the bases in Thailand. All of these arrows that you see all along here indicate at least a wing of airplanes. On the coastline over here, it was all fighters. When you come down in here, the B-52s were based at Utatao in Thailand. I flew first out of Cam Way, which I think is about right there in the first tour in '65. That was the first deployment of Air Force wings. There was a Marine wing up here in the Da Nang area. And then a second tour, I flew out of Udon in Thailand here, and this was another fighter base here. So we had an awful lot of firepower there that was inappropriately used for many, many years. As we all know, the war resulted in 58,000 dead and hundreds of people injured. Most of us have different ideas on Vietnam and what we should or should not do. I had to draw in my own mind some comparison of how the Vietnam War started on the presumption that one of our destroyers was attacked by a North Korean gunboat. There's still a question of whether or not that ever occurred. And that's when Lyndon Johnson then authorized the first bombings, major bombings and major deployments of Air Force, Army, and Marine units to Vietnam. You notice what just happened in the last couple of days in the Middle East, and I can see a very similar situation occurring there in what started a real war of 58,000 of our best and proud folks. Next one, please. I broke it into two. The war in Vietnam in the air, I emphasize in the air, was entirely different. In the north, we had much more defensive guns, and the first time we encountered something that we had never seen before was surface-to-air missiles. The surface-to-air missile was an SA-2. The current systems that Russia have and that we have are much more sophisticated than the SA-2. SA-2 was literally about as tall as a telephone pole and about half again as big around. So you could see it coming. And the only thing that you had to defend against an SA-2 was maneuver against it. They were very fast. They were moving at about 3.5 Mach, and therefore they didn't turn. So what you did with the SAM is you've always put it on your wing, and you held your breath as long as you could until you think, now's the time to do something. Either went up or down or turn to generate angle on that missile, and it would overfly or underfly you because it couldn't make the turn. So we had several losses in the Hanoi area and up north. As you came down south, the air defenses were less intense. But I need to point out too that one of the problems we have with the politics here, we had 5A, 6A, 4, and so on. You see all these breakdowns of areas. These two and this and number 4 belong to the Navy. The rest were the Air Force. Why do we have 2 Air Forces? And in fact, we had 6 Air Forces in operation in Vietnam. We had the CIA, we had the South Vietnamese Air Force, we had the Strategic Air Force. The B-52s were controlled out of Omaha, Nebraska, and told where to go, how to come into their targets, and how to turn off their targets. It was the most bureaucratic war you've ever had. I went to Cameron Bay as a young captain. We thought we were there for God and country to fight. 6 months later, we knew what a mess we were in terms of the politics of this situation. But in any instance, that was one of the problems, was coordination. In addition to that, we weren't allowed to bomb. There's 2 railroads coming out of China, and we couldn't bomb within 20 nautical miles of the border, and there was a circle around Hanoi about that big. It left 15 miles for you to attack trains. You couldn't attack the MiG bases. You could actually fly with the MiG bases on a bombing run, watch the MiGs taking off, and unable to attack. The targeting for the North was in fact done in the White House, and I'm not kidding. It was called the Tuesday meeting. And Lyndon Johnson famously says, those flyboys aren't going to bomb an outhouse without me telling them which one. And that's how the targeting was done. I got a chart here to talk about that a little bit. We all knew that. We also now know, did not at the time, thank God, we probably had a revolt. We now know that the targets in the north were being passed to the Swiss embassy and then on to the Vietnamese so that they could clear out any civilian casualties that might occur in there. Well, you know what they did. They put all their guns and SA-2s on the targeted areas. In other words, they knew the targets we were bombing in the north. The route interjection you see here had to do with the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which really starts right here at this red line, and that's called route interjection. I flew MiG screens. I bombed in 1 and 2, but all of my missions north were in fact MiG screens, both here and out over the water. The refueling, you always took off the bases. This is Thailand and even out of Cam Ranh Bay, and you hit the tankers here. Fuel, again, in a fighter is never enough. And you always refueled, topped off, and then went in. And generally speaking, you need to have fuel coming back out if you've used your afterburner for defensive maneuver or whatever. These tankers, bless their heart, this is only one track. There were several tracks here called red, blue, and white tracks. And you came out, and they were restricted from coming any further than about right here because of potential danger to the tankers. These guys came further north than that when you needed to come north. and they saved an awful lot of pilots, and they should be carrying medals rather than the people flying the fighters. Route interdiction, we had, by the way, there was 3 wars going on most people don't think about here. There was the Vietnamese War, there was the Pathet Lao in Laos, and mostly the bombing in there, we didn't know who we were talking to control our strikes. And it was generally speaking from the CIA that was doing most of the fighting in there. And then of course, later on, what made a lot of news was the situation in Cambodia, and that was the Khmer Rouge. Later on, the Vietnamese, after they took over their country, they wiped out the Khmer Rouge and took control of Cambodia too, essentially control. But that was the fight in the north. I'll give you some loss statistics in just a minute that shows that our loss statistics in total in Vietnam were nothing compared to what Mr. Sanderson saw in World War II, except when you get in this area here. There was one bridge we tried to destroy, the Tan Hoa Bridge, which is right there. We lost 26 airplanes trying to drop that bridge down. Finally, about 1971, 4 Marine A-7s with the first laser-guided bombs we had. We all had manual bombs, and manual bombing is not a science, it's a skill. But they put 4 2,000-pound bombs on that Tan Hoa Bridge and took it down. It was built by the French when the French were there. Next slide. Then the war. 1 minute? 8 more. We're going to have to go through those ticks over there. Those are supposed to remind me, but I think strike request. This is how the targets were determined in the north, not in the south, but in the north. The Air Force would get together their preferred targets. How do we stop these people? For example, how about closing the harbor, which we could have done in the very beginning? The task force then would come to St. Pat's, that's the commander in the Pacific, and they would get their finger in the till. They would go to the Joint Chiefs in the Pentagon, they'd stir it up. CIA would then stick their finger in it, and it would go to the White House for the Tuesday cabinet. And McNamara and Johnson literally picked targets and said, you guys are going to go bomb this. You can do this and you can do that. In other words, there was no plan, there was no strategic idea of how to stop what was going on, to stop the flow of traffic and block Hanoi. Result, we had losses because they knew we were coming. Limited effect in terms of the war, lives wasted, frustrations, and mission restrictions were there all the time. We also had a phony war that I called. After we stopped bombing and most of the forces were pulled out of South Vietnam, we were still bombing in the phony war in Cambodia. The phony war was, we were restricted and we really didn't have anything to bomb. We had a gun in the airplane now, and the gun is the best close air support tool you have with troops in contact. But to do that, you've got to get down amongst them. You normally shoot a gun when you're strafing at something inside of 2,000 feet. 1,500 is better. In other words, you need to get close to your work. We were restricted in Cambodia from flying below 3,500 feet. But if we got good targets, you can bet we flew below 3,500 feet. The only thing you had to do is make sure when you got back home, you took your gun camera film out and exposed it so nobody could ever tell that you were below 3,500 feet. That's the kind of restrictions they had in there. Then we spent, goodness knows how much money and bombs in the part of the phony war. This is the Mekong River coming out of here, down here, and to get food into Phnom Penh, which is the people we presumably fighting to protect. To get food into Phnom Penh, we would stack fighters along here up to 25,000 feet and literally walk bombs up both sides of the river to get the rice barges into Phnom Penh. I don't know how much that rice cost per pound, but it was expensive. Unfortunately, there was nobody shooting at you. It was kind of cakewalk. We were just bomb carriers at the time. Terrible way to expend ammunition and so on. That's the phony war then. I talked about manual dive bomb. One of the greatest benefits, or if that's the right word, maybe satisfaction, is helping troops in combat. During the first part of the war, we didn't have a gun on the F-4. We had a gun on some of them in a pod, but we didn't have enough for every airplane. And when we engage in troops in contact, we want to get close so we don't hit any Americans. All we had was the bombs, and there were World War II bombs, the old 500-pound bombs from World War II. And this tells you about manual dive bombing. Some people were better than other people. And I was always reluctant to drop any bomb on any troops in contact. Many times you could actually see the troops in contact, you could see the tracers back and forth. And then later on in the war, however, we got napalm you could always use. That's getting close to your work. But you always didn't have napalm. Later we had bombs then that had the fins open up on the rear called snake eyes. And we could get down and deliver it just like napalm, only you were down about 100 feet or 200 feet. The fin would come out and the bomb explode behind you so you didn't destroy yourself. But this was, as I said, we didn't have anything but manual dive bomb. Until today, no one manually dives bombs anymore. It's all electronic, and you can almost put a bomb through the windshield of a car if that's what you want to do now in terms of the computer. Our airplanes did not have computers in them. The first airplane I ever flew with a computer was an F-15, and it had 64 kilobytes. I think that's the measurement, 64 kilobytes computer power. And you may remember the address, small computers that you carried in your hand for addresses. They had more than 65 kilobytes. But however, the first time I bombed with an F-15 on a practice bomb, in a flight of 4, we put every bomb, everybody had 6 bombs, practice bombs. And we put every bomb within 35 feet, and all we needed was 64 kilobytes to do that. All right, next slide. Okay, let's keep punching that, and I'll close here. Let's do all of it. This is the aircraft losses you might be interested in. His loss rate in Korea was 0.4 per thousand, and 2 per thousand in World War II. I'm sorry, our loss rate in Korea was 4.4 per thousand. Korea was 2 per thousand, and World War II was 9.7. That again applies until you got into the Hanoi area, and it was a different ballgame. I didn't have a breakout. We dropped more bombs in Southeast Asia than in World War II. More bombs in Southeast Asia in World War II, and we couldn't win the war. Well, you know, the bombs were going the wrong place. Navy had 21 aircraft carriers, not there all the time. They kept 2 aircraft carriers in the Tonkin Gulf in the north and 1 in the south. So they were flying in both areas. The Marines had 1 wing around the Da Nang area. The Army took a hit, and those guys really are the heroes. I'm talking about the helicopter pilots. That says 5,086. I don't think we'll ever know how many we lost, particularly when they went into Cambodia secretly. I've got subjects of interest, but we're running out of time, and I'm impinging on General Pilar, and I've seen his presentation, which is very interesting. Thank you for your time.
There's questions afterwards. I think we're going to have to, because the air show is going to start at 2 o'clock promptly. We want to finish, let General Pilar, if you have to make a restroom block, there's 2 restrooms here and 1 at the end of the hallway. There's 6 stalls and 1 in the hallway. 1 stall here, 1 stall there, all the way down the end, and you come back. We'll save your seat. Okay. So he's all right, but the rest of you may not be all right. So you can come back in. We'll save your seat. You want to go to the restroom? So that was taught by General Gene 3. So I'm going to introduce General Pilar. He came all the way from Columbus, Indiana. I got to get his slides on here. So this general is a major general in the Air Force. General 3 was talking about refueling. I was in the Persian Gulf War, and so this general probably helped me. We were down on some islands south of the Persian Gulf, and lots of KC-131s, and they're the ones that refuel all these planes. Refueling is a crucial thing He was first flew in the EC-47 in the Vietnam era, and then he flew a lot of KC-135s. Those are refueling, and then radar later, and then an E-8 at a later time. But what he's going to talk about today is a thing that hits all of us. It's changed our civilization in the United States. It's changed what we call our freedom. If you go to an airport today, we have to be inspected because we don't know what everybody's carrying on board. So what we're going to face in the future is what we faced in the past is because of what happened on 9/11. And all of us can remember that day vividly. I could ask everybody in the room where you were on 9/11, and you'd be able to tell me where you were on 9/11. So this gentleman was lucky enough to be behind the scenes on 9/11, and he can tell you a lot what went on 9/11. I think it's going to be so interesting to hear what really happened behind the scenes. So he came all the way from Columbus. I can't tell you how grateful I am for him to be here, so I'd like you to give him his attention. He's been limited now to a half an hour. We will watch the planes, and you can drink some more whatever, and you can have some more food. We've got plenty of food. But this is General Mark Pillar, and glad to have you, General, here.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, well, thanks for inviting me here today. I was down in Evansville several months ago and gave this same presentation. And I've got some TV coverage, so I guess that's why I ended up again. So down here again, so September 11th, that was my first day at United States Strategic Command. That was my first day on the job at STRATCOM. Strategic Command, Omaha, Nebraska, Offutt Air Force Base. They are in charge of all the nuclear capabilities of the United States. All the submarines, all the missiles, all the bombs, all the bombers, and all the tankers. If we go to nuclear war, that all comes under STRATCOM. I was hired to be, as a reservist, I was hired to be the reserve advisor to the 4-star commander of STRATCOM. And he hired me. He had a reserve advisor, Air Force reserve advisor, and he had a Navy reserve advisor. He wanted his Air Force reserve advisor to be a tanker guy, a KC-135 guy, because 60% of all the tanker capabilities are in the Guard and Reserve. And I was reserve, so I knew a lot about tankers. So he hired me because I knew a lot about tankers and because I liked really fine scotch. So this thing is not working. All right, next slide. So I'm going to show up on my first day at STRATCOM, and we're going to have a global exercise. Every year we have a global exercise. Here's Strategic Command. Got some static display stuff here, and that's the headquarters right there for Strategic Command. Right across the street is the Officers Club and Visiting Officers Quarters. I was staying in the VOQ across the street. Got in that morning, and so we're going to do a worldwide exercise. We do that once a year, where we do a war game kind of thing, and there's a scenario that we don't know about, but there's another command structure that does know about it, and they run the war game, and we react to it to make sure we go on the correct checklists, do the right procedures, talk to the right people, get the right input, end up at the right place at the right time. So it normally starts on a Monday morning, about 6:30 in the morning, and we get called in to go to these briefings. We get weather briefings, and what it normally starts with dumbasses stand in Idiotsville, and they start throwing rocks at each other, and it just escalates and escalates and escalates until the United States and somebody else gets involved. So that's what we're going to do starting on 9/11, and it's going to last the entire week. Okay, next slide, please. So we start off at 6 o'clock in the morning. This is the battle staff. We're 40 feet below ground in a nuclear-hardened area. There's a door over here on the left, right there. That's about 4 feet thick of steel. And they can lock us in there, and supposedly we would survive a nuclear blast. Never been tested, but that's the story they gave us. So we're down here, and there's about 45 folks down there. There's 7 flag officers, 1 political advisor. These TV screens up here, those are each about 5 feet by 5 feet, so you can isolate them, so you'll have some information here, different information here, different information here, or you can have one big picture. One thing I found when I went to general officer training, they taught us that if you do this enough, you can just about irritate anybody. So that's a handy tool. So we're down here about 6 o'clock in the morning, and they start building on the scenario. We're getting leadership. Well, yeah. In one corner, they're tracking all the leadership, and up in this control area where they're running the program, they've got a person that is playing the President of the United States, the person that's playing the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They got all these people up there doing that and being part of the scenario. So if we have a question for the President, we get this acting guy that's the president of the exercise. So we're getting inputs, and we're watching different things. We have weather over on this screen, and status of troops and things that are going on all over the place. Messages, scenarios, weather updates, intel updates, all up on those screens. So we are getting ready to start our thing. And next slide, please. So there we are. We're sitting down there, and these are the folks up here that are running the scenario. And they've got books and checklists, and if we do this, then they put in that input, and if we do that, then they do something different. So they're up there, and they're the support battle staff. They're making recommendations, they're tracking messages, they run the scenario, they run the checklists, they provide the briefings, the intel, the weather briefings, and it's all made up. It's all just a game, but this is practice for us to make sure we're doing it right. And while this is going on, we are sending out messages to activate the Guard and Reserve, to start loading dummy bombs on airplanes, to put to disperse the submarines and get them out of dock and out roaming around, and for the missiles to start running their checklists in case they have to launch. So we've got those role players up there, and we're down there. And let's go to the next slide. So this is it. That's Admiral Meese. He was my boss. 4-star admiral, probably the smartest guy I've ever known. Knew nothing about tankers, basically. He was a submariner, and his 6 nuts to nowhere. They were real deliberate, real slow, not any reaction times, just rolling along. But one smart guy, one really smart guy, and another great Scotch drinker. So we're going to run Global Guardian 01. We're starting all the stuff. The bombers are getting ready. The subs are moving along. The missiles are ready to go. And next slide, please. So we're doing all this stuff, and one of the guys upstairs calls down to Admiral Meese and says, "Hey, sir, there's something going on. I think you ought to see this." So they flash this onto our, Admiral Meese says, "Put this on screen 1." So he puts this on screen 1, and everybody goes, "What the heck is going on here?" We're listening to the news, report that an airplane has flown into the building. Nobody knows if it's a big airplane, a little airplane, lots of rumors. We're observers like everybody else. As an airline pilot, and with other airline guys in there, we're going, did somebody fall asleep? There's no way that this guy got vectored into there. It was clear. It was clear blue skies. How the heck did that happen? Did he have a heart attack? Lots of conjecture as to why the airplane went into the South Tower. We watched, we listened, we speculated. That was at 8:46 when American Flight 11 crashed into that went into the North Tower. Next slide, please. So the president's down in Fort Lauderdale, Sarasota, sorry, and talking to some kids. His advisor comes in and tells him, so he says, "It's time for me to get out of here." So he gets up and leaves. So that's good. You can go to the next slide. So this is what we're watching. 8:46, Flight 11 goes in. Next slide, please. At 9:03, United Flight 175 goes into the South Tower. When we saw that, it just sucked all the air out of the room. The gasp was just unbelievable. And Admiral Meese turned around and said, "That was no accident. We're under attack. Cancel the exercise, get out the real world books, and we're going to war." And so that's what we did. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's DC. I'll give you a little chronology here. 9:21, all the bridges and tunnels into New York City were closed. 9:25, all domestic flights were grounded by the FAA. 9:45, American Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. 10:05, the South Tower collapsed. 10:05, the White House was evacuated. 10:10, a large section of the Pentagon collapsed. And at 10:10, also United Flight 93 crashed into Shanksville. All right, so all this is going on all over the place. In the meantime, what the military and civilians are doing, and this is the backside of stuff you never see, that all this chaos is going on up there. We're paddling as fast as we can. We get on if you will, sort of a party line where everybody is listening and talking to everyone else, and it's run out of the Pentagon by the Deputy Director for Operations, the DDO. And so we would be on the speakers and we could all hear him where we were, and he would say, "This is the DDO. We are thinking of grounding all the airplanes. We're going to poll everybody and get your input." So you had about 30 seconds to decide what your input would be. And, mostly you'd say yes, I think that's a good idea. However, but what about this? So on this party line was all the major commands in the military, all the services, even the Navy. Had the NSA, the FAA, the CIA, the FBI, FEMA, Air Combat Command, NORAD, NORTHCOM, STRATCOM, SpaceCom, EUCOM, PACOM. Everybody and their brother was on this line because if you're going to make these kind of decisions, you want the best input available. Vice President Cheney and Connie Rice were in the basement of the White House at the time. Rumsfeld was in the basement of the Pentagon with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Shelton, was actually on an airplane on his way to Europe when it struck, so he did not come back. So we're getting all this input. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information coming in, and we're trying to help the vice president make decisions. So I already mentioned, do we ground the airplanes? Everybody said pretty much yes, we ground the airplanes. Huge amount, I can't remember how many thousands of airplanes were airborne at the time. So then the question comes out, what happens if we get one that does not land? I mean, pilots know what the signals are. If they've got radios, they're being told to land. If they don't land, what do we do? Well, we have interceptors that come up, they get eyeballs in the cockpit, make sure the captain, the pilot can see them, and they give them the signal to land. Okay, the guy still doesn't land. What do we do? Do we shoot him down? Do we shoot down American citizens? That was a tough question. So he polled it. Vice President Cheney polled everyone, said, what do you think? And the answer was yes. If we find some that are out there that are not landing, we are considering them enemies, and we're going to shoot them down. Never been done before. Pretty tough call. But the important part is that he took the input of all the subject matter experts and then made what I think was the right decision. I think that's it for that slide. Oh, did we go back? No, you went wrong direction. Oh, no, sorry, back. Okay, that's good. So there we are, and we're making these decisions and all that kind of stuff. And the number of crackpots that came out from under their rocks and made phone calls, threatening phone calls, is just astronomical. Every nut job came out and made a phone call, and somebody had to go check on all those reports. There was a bomb at the Transamerica building in San Francisco. There was a bomb at the Sears Tower in Chicago. There was a bomb on a Delta airplane that was parked in Cleveland on the airport. There were 4 Ryder trucks that were headed toward Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado that were going to blow that up. There was a 4-ship of crop dusters that were coming north from Mexico that were going to spread anthrax on Phoenix. First responders were everywhere. Yeah, you have to send somebody to check out all these things. So while we're watching TV, and of course the first responders in New York City were just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, when you think of everyone else running down the stairs, and all these men and women are running up the stairs to try and save people. I mean, they're unbelievable heroes to me. So we're talking about all this stuff and trying to figure out what's best to do. They ask, one of the questions that came out was, should we implement Skatana? And Admiral Meese turns around to no one in particular and says, what the hell is Skatana? Well, being an old sack puke that I was, I knew what Skatana was. And it's an acronym, and I'll find out what it is here in a second. I haven't done this. I haven't done Skatana in 30 years. But basically, okay, what it is you shut down all the navigation aids throughout the United States. So it's more difficult to get from point A to point B. I mean, you can do it visually, but you won't have nav aids to direct you into what your next target might be. So he says, what's Skatana? And so me and one other old SAC guy, oh, here it is. It's Security Control, Air Traffic, and Air Navigation Aids. Ta-da. So I actually had an input. So he says, what's Skatana? I said, we shut down the nav aids. He says, what's that mean? And so I explained that to him too. So he was all for Skatana. So interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, when we sort of had a debrief for this, and I was talking to the 4-star from NORAD, I said, General Eberhardt, I said, when we did Skatana and we shut down the nav aids, think about, a lot of these airplanes now have GPS. Did we think about shutting down the satellites? He said, yes, we did. However, if we shut down the satellites, we shut down the banking industry for the entire world. We decided not to do that. So that would have gotten some people's attention. Okay, so they would ask questions. They would poll the members. Do we ground the aircraft? Yes. Do we shoot down? Yes. Do we increase the defense control? Yes, we did all that. And the threat count. And the president is sort of out of the loop on all this. It turns out he didn't quite have the communications that he needed on Air Force One. So he leaves Florida and he goes to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he lands there, and their comms are messed up also. So he gets back on Air Force One and starts heading toward Omaha because we were running an exercise. We had our communications backed up about 8 days to Sunday, 8 ways to Sunday. I mean, we had comms out our ears. So he comes he's going to come to Offutt. So Admiral Meese finds out that he's probably coming there. So he says, okay, no outside phone calls from here. We want to maintain security. About that time, a guy comes up on one of the screens. Hi, it's Joe Bag of Donuts from Offutt Air Force Base, and we have rumors that the president will be landing at Offutt Air Force Base. And look, there's Air Force One now. Just like that. So much for security. So we're down there in the senior battle staff, and next slide, please. So the president lands, wrong direction. Navy is directionally back one. Oh. Okay, so the president comes through the door here, never been in here before, of course. So he comes through the door and he sees all the TV screens and all kinds of stuff's going on there. And 25 of us are standing at attention. And he sort of does a double take and then looks at the screens and tells us all to sit down. So he sits down in front with Admiral Meese, and Admiral Meese starts filling him in on what's on all the screens and the DEFCON, what checklists we've run and what the status is and what we know and what we don't know and all that kind of stuff. Because at the time, we didn't really know who had targeted us. So we just leave it at that. And you can go to the next slide. Okay, so there's the president and there's Admiral Meese, and they're going to talk to the folks in D.C. Oh, so while the president is sitting down in front with Admiral Meese, we're still on this party line. And the president gets a phone call from Secretary Rumsfeld. And the president says, Mr. Secretary, he says, I think you need to know that we're not the only ones listening to this conversation. He says, I'm here with my 25 newest best friends, and they can all hear everything that you say. And Secretary Rumsfeld said, well, thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the heads up on that. And the president says, well, he says, I figured I need to tell you that because I'm never sure what's going to come out of a former Navy fighter pilot's mouth. So, even while things are burning, falling down, and things aren't good, they've still got a sense of humor. So, next slide. They went into the next room and did a top secret face-to-face with the folks in D.C. The folks in D.C. did not want him to come back. He was bound and determined he was going to get back there to let the world know that, okay, we got a bloody nose, but we're going to get up and we'll be back at it here real soon. So don't try anything else. Next slide. Perseverance will prevail. That's the flag that those guys slung over the side of the Pentagon. Next slide, please. Yeah, let's not forget. Next slide. We are at war. Next slide. Again, my buddy out at NORAD, when somebody says, well, how come we're over in Afghanistan? How come we're over there? How come we're over there? And he looks at him right now and he says, I'll tell you what. He said, we played one home game. We didn't like that. They're all going to be away games from now on. We were there till probably 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock that night. Every day was Groundhog Day. We just get up and kept doing the same things, trying to defend the people, the citizens of the United States of America. We are the Department of Defense, not the Department of War. Our job is to defend our citizens, and that's what we were thinking. What's the next thing they are going to try to do? We were afraid that they would try to do something with the reservoirs and kill all of our citizens that way. How do you guard all the reservoirs in the United States of America? So we were constantly thinking of that. Every day started about 6 o'clock in the morning. Every day ended about 8 o'clock at night. I would, the first night we got to go back, I walked across the street to the Officers Club, had a sandwich, had a beer or 6, and then went back to my room and collapsed. Got up the next day, did the same thing. I had a rental car that week. I was there for the entire week. I put 7 miles on the rental car just because it was just walking back and forth to headquarters. I will be here for the rest of the time. If you have, I guess we got a couple minutes for questions. If you got something, Dan?
You wanted a stupid question.
No. Man, Dan, there are no stupid questions. There are just stupid people that ask questions.
Brian,
Thank you. Thanks for that softball. Appreciate it.
there's stories that an F-16 pilot from Washington was scrambled to Flight 93. Only problem is, you said they had rockets. She had no ammunition on that fighter. So if she'd had to take them down, they would have had to crash into the plane. Is that a correct?
Yeah, there was a couple stories out about that. The first one that scrambled, I think, were out of Massachusetts, maybe the Guard, or I can't remember where they were from. One of them was a female. The airplanes that, since we don't do the alert thing anymore, we used to have NORAD alert and airplanes on defense on alert all the time. They were armed, the missiles, all that kind of stuff. That went away years ago. So all they were going to be able to do was run into them and knock them down. And one of the F-16 pilots, I think she was the wingman for the squadron commander. And they just, hopefully show of force, but if push came to shove, they were going to push. Another question? Anybody? All right. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Okay, just 2 super speakers, lucky to hear all those interesting things of the Vietnam era and then 9/11. So you're more than welcome to just socialize. We'll turn some lights on, move some of these chairs out. There's booze over here, food over here, and just don't drink too much booze. And the planes are going to start flying at 2 o'clock. LST is going to reenact as well. So thank you for coming and enjoy yourself.